Atlanta, a gentle spring morning. Sunlight filtered through rows of leafy trees, spreading across spotless sidewalks where mothers pushed strollers on leisurely walks, retirees sipped coffee by their window frames, and soft jazz music drifted from a bakery soaked in the scent of butter. At the intersection of Juniper and Pontoleon, a building stood tall, like it had been carved from marble Eastbrook Women's Medical Center. Glass walls reflected the sky like mirrors, the exterior was lined with luxurious grey-veined stone, and the automatic doors opened without a sound. Inside, orchids bloomed in crystal vases, cream-colored leather chairs were evenly spaced, and the air conditioning was so cool that one had to consciously adjust their breathing to feel in sync with the atmosphere of the place. In front of the glass doors, a black woman stood still. Her right hand rested gently on her full round belly, while her left hand tightened around the strap of a faded canvas bag. Monica Brooks, 35 years old, wore a light blue maternity dress. She was not a designer, not flashy, but neat, clean, and gentle, like the look in her eyes. Her brown skin glowed under the sunlight, standing out yet feeling lost in a space where everyone wore pointed heels and $1,000 soft leather purses. She didn't press any bell. No one came to open the door. But the glances of a few white couples walking by said enough. They saw her but didn't greet her. A man lowered his head to avoid eye contact. A woman clutched the strap of her purse tighter, as if it might be snatched in this sterile environment. Behind the reception desk, a pale-faced blonde receptionist was typing on a keyboard. She looked up for a second, then looked back down even faster, as if Monica's presence was merely a foreign shadow outside the luxurious coverage area of this place. Monica took a deep breath, not to seem strong, but to hide the unease quietly rising in her chest. "It's okay, baby," she whispered to the belly that grew larger daily. "It's just a routine checkup. Daddy will be here soon." She said it like a simple, calm ritual, but when she checked her phone at 10:13, Monica blinked gently. David had promised to be there by 10:30, even though he had been urgently called to the federal district office that morning for a civil lawsuit. "I'll make it," he had said, and Monica believed him. David had never broken a promise. But today was their first time seeing a 4D ultrasound of their baby, a moment she had waited 6 months for, and now she was walking in alone. The glass door slid open soundlessly. Monica stepped in. No one greeted her, no one smiled. Only the faint sound of high heels echoing in the open space, the low hum of the air conditioning, and the feeling that each of her steps was disrupting the orbit of a place that was never meant for her. She approached the reception desk, her heel tapping lightly on the marble floor, as though she were stepping into a restricted area. The blonde receptionist, probably in her 20s, her face lightly made up, like the room's soft light, kept her eyes on the computer screen. No glance up, no words. Monica slowed her steps, her right hand instinctively resting on her belly. "Good morning," she said, voice gentle but clear. "I'm Monica Brooks. I have an appointment with de Langford at 10:30. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't repeat. It was the voice of someone long accustomed to being excessively polite, just to be treated like a normal person in places like this. The receptionist stopped typing. She looked at Monica, not with the eyes of someone receiving information, but with the gaze of someone scanning the other's appearance for something out of place. 1 second, then 2, her gaze still didn't shift. Not overly blatant, but enough to let someone know they were being silently sized up. "You said Langford," she asked again, her tone tinged with skepticism, as if Monica had mispronounced the name. Monica nodded, her faint smile fading. "I booked the appointment 2 weeks ago and reconfirmed it over the phone last night." I see it." The receptionist mumbled, then pushed a clipboard across the counter with a completely indifferent expression. "Fill this out for me." Monica took the form and walked toward the waiting area. Polished leather chairs and white walls hung with promotional images show the white mothers smiling at blue-eyed, rosy-cheeked babies. She sat down, gently adjusted her dress to cover her belly, and filled each information box with neat handwriting. But the atmosphere around her couldn't be straightened out like handwriting. A woman carrying a Chanel bag stole a glance at Monica, then turned away, gripping her strap tightly. A middle-aged man reading a newspaper avoided looking her way, as if Monica had shattered an invisible curtain in the room. Every whisper, every sidelong glance. No one shouted anything racist, but every look whispered the same toxic question. What is she doing here? Monica kept her eyes on the paper. Her hand kept writing, her heart kept pounding. With every second without David arriving, another layer of her internal armor peeled away. She whispered inwardly, "This is for the baby, not for me. I'm here for this child." But when her pen began to shake, when the word guardian curved awkwardly across the paper, Monica knew, no matter how strong a woman is, being alone in a place where no one wants you present is still cruel. And somewhere behind the door marked to Langford, a storm was waiting. Monica had just placed her pen on the final box of the form when a dry voice echoed from the waiting room door, "Brooks." She looked up. A nurse in a pale ivory uniform stood at the doorway. No smile, no introduction, just a quick sweep of her eyes from Monica's head to her belly as if checking someone's luggage before boarding a plane. Monica stood up, rubbed her lower back gently, nodded politely, and walked forward. She opened with a slight smile, but the nurse had already turned away, striding decisively down the cold hallway. Along both walls were promotional photos, glowing blonde mothers cradling newborns under soft white light. Monica glanced at them, and a strange, familiar ache tightened in her chest. How many women like her had ever appeared on those posters? The hallway led to room 3B. The nurse opened the door, turned and pointed inside. "The doctor will be right in." Her voice was clipped, mechanical, like an automated system command. The door closed behind her. Monica exhaled slowly. The room smelled of disinfectant and artificial lavender. The exam table was lined with paper. The ultrasound monitor blinked, awaiting input. She sat on the table's edge, adjusted her dress, and instinctively placed her hand on her belly. She checked the time, 10:43. David still hadn't arrived. Just a few minutes late, but time stretched endlessly in this place. She tried to keep her breathing steady. Inside her, the baby shifted, sensing the tension building in her mother's body. Click, the door opened. A figure entered, no knock, no greeting. Dr. Victoria Langford. Her white coat was crease-free, her blonde hair tied up high, her grey eyes cold like dry glass. She didn't extend a hand, didn't ask for Monica's name, didn't even offer the most basic professional smile. She just looked, stared. The silence dragged on, not professional but intentional contempt. Monica sat up straight, her voice calm. "Good morning, doctor. I believe today is the 4D ultrasound appointment, right?" Langford didn't reply immediately. Her gaze drifted slowly from Monica's face to her belly, then down to her shoes as if appraising a discounted item. Finally, she spoke in a soft, sharp voice, cloaked in the language of authority. "So, you're Monica Brooks?" Monica nodded. "Yes. I scheduled the appointment 2 weeks ago." Langford raised an eyebrow slightly. "You came alone," a question devoid of concern, sounding more like an accusation. Monica kept her composure. "My husband had an urgent matter at the federal office. He's on his way." A smile flickered briefly at the corner of Langford's mouth, but not a friendly one. It was the smile of someone preparing to strike. "Of course," she murmured, sorting through papers slowly and deliberately. Then, as if a thought had just occurred to her, she turned, her voice now laced with sharpness and venom. "Let me guess. You don't know who the baby's father is. Or maybe he decided to disappear this morning." The air in the room froze. Monica looked up. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Langford folded her arms, took a slow step forward. "Look, I don't know what you think this place is, but this is not a public clinic. This specialized medical facility is for women who take responsibility for their health and their child's future." She squinted eyes, scanning Monica's maternity dress and faded canvas bag again. "It's not for people who walk in alone, dressed like they just stepped off a Greyhound bus." The air thickened as if someone had shattered a vial of poison into the room. Monica stood, her hand tightening around her bag strap. Her voice dropped, no longer polite, but the quiet firmness of someone who had reached the edge of tolerance. "I made an appointment. I confirmed it. And I came here respectfully." Langford didn't back away. She stepped closer, leaning in toward Monica's face, her voice lowered like speaking to a troublemaker. "People like you always come in respectfully when they want something. Then comes chaos, noise, and blame. Not today. Not in my facility." Monica's heart pounded like a war drum. The baby inside her began to stir. She swallowed hard, placing her hand on her belly to steady herself, ready to walk out. But then Langford turned. Her voice shifted again, this time no longer mocking, but accusing. "Wait. I think something's missing." Monica frowned. Langford walked over to the counter, eyes glancing across the surface, then curling her lips into a smirk like an actress reaching the climax of her scene. "My platinum Cartier watch. I left it here this morning. And now, it's gone." She turned to face Monica, her eyes locked in. No yelling, no loud accusation. Just a gaze cold as needles and a statement that sliced like a knife through pride. "You're the only person who entered this room." Monica froze. "What are you saying?" "I—" Her voice cracked before she could finish. Langford didn't reply. She turned toward the door, her parting words dropping to the floor like iron weights. "I'm tired of charity cases walking in and leaving with more than they brought. Security will be here shortly. Don't make this worse." Click. The door closed. Once again, Monica was alone, but wasn't a patient this time. She had been turned into a suspect. Her hands trembled. She reached into her bag to pull out her phone, but it was too late. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Heavy, steady. Not a doctor, not a nurse. It was judgment. It was authority. It was a system that was well practiced in detaining before listening. Monica clenched her fists, clutching her belly. The baby inside her shifted slightly, as if sensing the storm about to arrive. The door swung open. Two men entered, dressed in dark blue security uniforms, shiny badges on their left chests, and faces as cold and expressionless as the name tags clipped to them solely for compliance. The first, older, held a clipboard, his eyes tired, indifferent. The second, younger, broad-shouldered, chewed gum lazily, his rhythm oozing arrogance. No one introduced themselves. No one asked if Monica was okay. Ms. Brooks, the older one, began, his voice sounding like a pre-recorded procedural announcement. "We received a report about a missing personal item. Dr. Langford identified you as the last person present in the room." Monica opened her mouth, but the younger man stepped forward before any word could leave her lips. "You'll have to come with us to the security office," he cut in, eyes fixed on her as if waiting for an excuse to escalate. "You can explain later." Monica instinctively stepped back, her hand moving to her belly. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice trembling, but still holding on to calm. I don't feel safe being escorted without a family member. I need to call my husband. You'll have that opportunity, the older man replied, after the initial investigation process is completed. That sentence sounded like a promise, but it was a sentence already passed. Monica looked at the two men blocking the door, a so-called exit with no way out. No one offered her a hand. No one cared if her back hurt, if her belly felt tight, or even if she was afraid. She followed them silently like a convict walking to judgment simply because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong skin color. The hallway behind the reception had no artwork, no soothing background music, only the pungent smell of bleach, locked steel doors, and the lonely sound of high heels tapping against old tiled floors. They stopped in front of a grey door with no nameplate. The younger one unlocked it. Inside a small room, flickering fluorescent lights, peeling paint on the walls. A metal table, some dusty file cabinets, and a plastic chair bolted to the floor like it was meant to trap memories in place. Sit, he ordered. Monica hesitated. She slowly sat down, pulling her dress around her legs, her hands clenched together and pressed against her belly, as if shielding the only thing inside her that remained untouched, her child. Please, she whispered. I need to call my husband. He's on his way here. Phone, the younger man said immediately. No personal devices allowed in this room. Monica blinked. You can't phone, he repeated this time with no emphasis. Because power didn't need explanation when it already lived in the eyes of those who wielded it. Silently, she pulled her phone from the canvas bag and placed it on the table. He took it, switched it off, and dropped it into a drawer clack, as if tossing away her right to defend herself. We'll hold on to it until the issue is resolved. The older man interjected, his voice soft, like he was comforting a report instead of a human being. You're not under arrest, but at this time you are being detained for investigation. We need your cooperation. Monica sat there, not screaming, not crying, but her heartbeat no longer felt like a heartbeat. It thundered in her chest like a war drum. Detained. For what? For not being white, for not arriving with her husband, for wearing a maternity dress instead of a Rolex. No one questioned her, no one searched her, they didn't need to. The goal wasn't to uncover the truth. The goal was to silence her. Meanwhile, back upstairs, where the hallway still smelled of expensive perfume and the sound of heels echoed rhythmically, David Brooks stepped through the glass doors of Eastbrook Medical Center with a calmness that bordered on frightening. He wore a charcoal gray tailored suit, buttoned up with a plain black tie. Above his breast pocket gleamed a small badge under the lights, Department of Justice, Office of Civil Rights Enforcement. Everyone in the waiting room looked up, not because he was loud, but because he changed the air around him. The light seemed sharper. The temperature felt colder. And every polite gesture in the room suddenly felt clumsy in the presence of someone who knew how to walk into places others wished he would disappear from. David walked to the reception desk where the blonde receptionist pretended to be busy with the computer screen. Good morning, he said. Calm, warm, but every syllable carried invisible force. I'm looking for my wife, Monica Brooks. She had a 10:30 appointment with Dr. Langford. I'm her husband. The woman blinked. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. 1 second, then 2. She didn't look him in the eye. Yes, let me check. David didn't pull out his phone, didn't sigh. He just waited. But his eyes did not wait. They demanded the truth to show itself. The receptionist glanced at the screen, then stammered, She's no longer in the exam room. I think security was called due to a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? David asked. still not raising his voice, but this time his tone had shifted from calm to warning. Dr. Langford reported a missing item. I think they took her to the security office. David leaned slightly forward, just enough to turn what sounded like a polite sentence into an urgent command. Take me there, now, or get someone who can. The receptionist sprang to her feet like a spring uncoiled in fear. I'll call the floor supervisor. No need, David cut in, reaching into his inner pocket and pulling out a slim leather wallet. With a practiced motion, he opened it to reveal a federal ID card. Gold seal shining with the words, Deputy Director, Office of Civil Rights Enforcement, U.S. Department of Justice. The woman held her breath. David held the badge in front of her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. No more, no less, then returned it to his pocket. Where is the security room? Her voice shrank like rain in a storm. Other hallway, past the staff elevator, first door on the left. David nodded, no more words. He turned and walked, not fast, not slow, but every step felt like it tilted the entire hallway. And then he arrived. In front of a grey metal door, slightly ajar. Inside, the sound of gum chewing, the rustle of paper, and the silence of a woman being stripped of her dignity. David pushed the door open. No knock, no need for an invitation. The flickering fluorescent light in the cramped security room cast a harsh glow. Monica sat motionless on the plastic chair bolted to the floor. Her hands clutched her belly, and her eyes blurred not just from the glare, but from physical, emotional, and profound fatigue with the places that should heal. But instead, humiliate. The door swung open. Both security guards turned. The younger one shot to his feet, the gum sticking between his teeth. The older one frowned slightly, his eyes narrowing. David stepped in without warning, without permission, as if the room already belonged to him. "How can we help you, sir?" the older man asked, his voice faltering. David didn't look at him. He walked straight to Monica and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm here," he whispered. His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to let her heart unclench with relief. She looked up at him, eyes glistening with tears, not from weakness, but because she saw herself reflected in the eyes of a man who never walked away. Then David turned around. His voice shifted into the cadence of justice. "Now you will step aside and explain why a pregnant woman is being detained with no attorney, no phone call, and her personal property confiscated based solely on the word of one individual." He didn't have to shout. Each word struck like a gavel, heavy with the seal of federal authority. The two men stood frozen. "We're just following procedure," the older one said. "You weren't trained in the Constitution." "I was," David replied, "and you've just violated at least 3 Federal Civil Rights Act provisions." The air in the room froze. Monica looked at him. For the first time that day, the scales felt like they were tipping toward what was right. David stepped to the control table, staring at the grainy security monitor, showing views of the hallway and exam rooms. "I want the full footage of my wife from the moment she entered Dr. Langford's office until she was brought down here." The younger man glanced at his superior. The older man swallowed hard. "We're not authorized to—" "You are now." David pulled out his federal badge again. "I'm invoking emergency oversight authority under the Federal Civil Protection Act. Delay this 1 more minute, and this will escalate to the State Attorney General's office." No one argued. The older man quietly sat down, hands trembling slightly as he navigated the system. The screen flickered. A grid of security cameras appeared. Hallways, reception, waiting area. Then, exam room 3B. Timestamp 10:41 a.m. Clear footage. Monica enters. Touches only the door handle and the chair. Doesn't approach the desk. Doesn't touch anything else. David pointed at the screen. Pause. Zoom in on the tray next to the tissue box. The camera zoomed. A platinum Cartier watch shimmered untouched. Monica murmured, "She left it there, right there." David nodded. "Continue." The video advanced. 10:52. Dr. Langford walks out. Her hand instinctively reaches for her wrist, glares at the empty tray, and storms off, visibly agitated. David pointed again. Pause. 10:54. Who walks in? A janitor. He empties the trash and wipes the table. Doesn't touch the tray. 10:59. The feed cuts out. David frowned. What happened? That's the shift change window. There's a blind spot in the handoff footage. How convenient, David muttered, his tone calm but dangerous. He opened a drawer and pulled out Monica's confiscated phone. With both hands he returned it to her. Then he turned back. You unlawfully detained a pregnant woman, denied her access to communication, held her without cause. She is not just my wife. She is a citizen, a teacher, a mother. His voice dropped slightly. And today, you picked the wrong person. Silence swallowed the room. No more gum chewing, no rustling papers, only the ticking of the flickering light overhead, like it shrank before the storm. Without thunder. David stood tall, facing the two officers. Detaining my wife without direct evidence is illegal. He began, his voice calm and firm, each word like nails hammered into the steel table. Seizing personal property without a warrant or receipt violates privacy. And denying a pregnant woman access to family during a psychological crisis may constitute endangerment or, at the very least, systemic abuse. The older man gulped about to speak, but David raised his hand not as a signal, but as a judge denying an interruption in court. Dr. Langford made a false accusation, and you chose to believe her without proof, without questioning, without verifying. You chose to detain. You chose to bend the law because she wore a white coat, and my wife didn't. He turned to Monica, still seated, tears not yet fallen, but her eyes beginning to shine. Then he turned back. I want the full name of whoever signed the detention order. I want the internal incident report. I want every second of this footage backed onto an external drive and sealed with a timestamp. If not, I'll have a formal inquiry on the Attorney General's desk before sundown. The younger man stepped back. The older man stood frozen like a statue. We were just following the doctor's request, he murmured. David nodded, and when a doctor's lack of ethics harms citizens and you choose to follow rather than uphold justice, that's not a mistake. That's complicity. He held out a slim folder. This is the formal notice. My wife will file a civil complaint for unlawful detention. I will pursue a federal civil rights lawsuit and request an independent investigation into racial bias in your response process. He paused. Today, you might call it procedure. Tomorrow, the procedure will have to change. No one answered. Monica rose, slowly, but straighter. Her hand gripped her phone, not as a device, but as a reclaimed symbol of dignity. I want to go back upstairs, she said, her voice soft but no longer trembling. I want to look de Langford in the eye, not to plead, but to remind her I have rights, and I don't walk alone. David nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. Let's go. The elevator let out a soft ding as it opened on the third floor, the very place Monica Brooks had entered just minutes ago in silence. Clutching her bag straps tightly, her heart filled with anxiety. But now, she stepped out with her head held high. No one looked away anymore. No one dared to ignore her. Every administrative staff member who had once turned a cold shoulder Every patient who had averted their eyes now turned their heads, not because she was causing a scene, but because the man walking beside her had shifted the gravity of the entire space. David Brooks walked steadily next to his wife, his expression unchanged, his gaze steely. He didn't need to speak or flash a badge. His presence alone carried the weight of justice walking in ahead of him. Monica did not shy away from the stairs. On the contrary, she walked directly past the reception area, which once made her feel small. This time she did not shrink. Their silence now felt exposed. A man in a navy suit stood waiting at the end of the hallway just outside the conference room, his posture hurried, tense, but still respectful. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks?" he asked. David nodded. "I'm the internal manager. The ethics committee is waiting inside." He lowered his voice to a near whisper. "Dr. Langford is also present." Monica didn't react. She tightened her grip on the phone in her hand, as if reminding herself that she had reclaimed her voice. The glass doors swung open. A long conference table stretched under stark white lighting. 3 members of the ethics board, 2 men and 1 woman, all white, all in suits, sat avoiding Monica's gaze, as if they too felt shame even before a word was spoken. At the far end of the table sat Dr. Langford, arms crossed. Her face no longer carried that air of superiority, though it didn't quite show remorse either. Something behind her cold brow and twisted smile had begun to crack. And for the first time, Monica saw her eyes not filled with contempt, but caution. Monica took a seat directly across the table. David stood behind her, silent, yet his presence felt like a sword planted firmly in the room, reminding everyone that this was no longer an internal discussion, but a formal hearing with real consequences. The chair cleared his throat and flipped open the file before him. "We've reviewed the footage, and it's clear there were significant procedural failures in handling this incident." David didn't wait for his turn. He placed a slim, red-stamped folder on the table. "This is the federal complaint. It lists in full defamation, unlawful detainment, invasion of privacy, and systemic racial discrimination." He looked directly at Langford. "You don't have to respond to me, but you will respond to the court." Langford tightened her lips. "It was my judgment based on suspicious behavior and unclear documentation." Monica leaned forward. "No, that wasn't medical judgment. That wasn't very objective. You looked at me, saw I was alone, not wearing designer labels, dark-skinned, and immediately decided I was a thief." She paused for a moment, then continued, not out of anger, but because she now understood the value of every word she spoke. "You didn't see a teacher. You didn't see a mother. You didn't see a citizen with the right to receive care. You saw a problem and wanted to remove it from your pristine world." The conference room sank into an eerie silence, not the kind born of confusion, but the kind that comes when the truth stands naked before everyone and cannot be denied. Dr. Langford tried one last line of defense. She came alone. There was no verification, no clear insurance record. "I had the right to be suspicious." David narrowed his eyes. "You had the right to be suspicious, but you did not have the right to convict. You didn't have the right to call security without checking. You didn't have the right to strip a patient of her dignity just because she didn't walk in beside a man in a suit." He took a step back, his voice lowering, but his tone now striking directly at the protective shell the system had built around its silent biases. "You didn't ask my wife if she needed help. You didn't ask if she was in pain, if she needed to rest, or even if she wanted water. You looked at her like a threat, an unusual case, a bad fit in your upscale client list, and then you turned your suspicion into a weapon to remove her." Langford cast her eyes downward for a beat, then looked up again, her expression still cold. "We don't have an instrument that measures emotion." I followed my professional instincts. Monica gave the faintest smile for the first time during the meeting, a smile both sorrowful and defiant. The issue isn't your medical training, Dr. Langford. The issue is that your instincts are programmed by prejudice. She leaned forward, her voice steady and her eyes no longer trembling. When you looked at me, who did you think I was? A girl abandoned? Someone unworthy of respect because I came from the other side of town? I shouldn't have to list my education or profession to be treated like a human. But if you must know, I'm a high school teacher. I teach US history. And the cruel irony is, I've taught about the civil rights movement and always believed I lived in a post-racial America. She took a deep breath. But today, you reminded me we must never forget. The air in the room turned brittle like glass. The grey-haired woman, one of the ethics board members, shifted in her seat. She looked at Monica, then at David, her eyes showing a crack in the armor. David stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Monica's shoulder. "We're not here just for an apology," he said. "We're here to initiate a full procedural review. We demand a formal written apology, an independent internal audit, and immediate suspension of Dr. Langford pending full investigation." The chair of the board nodded. "We anticipated that request. And we are finalizing the suspension order." Langford shot up from her chair, which screeched sharply across the floor. "This is absurd," she yelled. "I've worked here for 10 years. No one's ever complained." Monica met her eyes calmly unwavering and replied in a voice gentler than any accusation, "It's because no one ever complained. That you thought you were never wrong." Dr. Victoria Langford walked out of the conference room, shoulders stiff as stone and eyes unsettled. No one stopped her. No one saw her off. Only the soft thud of the glass door closing behind her sounded like a cold sentence being executed. The air in the room grew lighter, but no one exhaled in relief. Because this wasn't the end. This was merely the beginning of a more profound transformation of a medical facility, of an entire service industry, and of a city long accustomed to covering injustice with systematic silence. David placed the file back on the table. "This report will be submitted to the Department of Justice. We'll work with NGOs, the press, and federal inspectors to monitor reform progress at this center." The ethics board chair this time, no longer formulaic in tone, nodded slowly. "We are committed to issuing a press release within 48 hours. We will begin a full audit of our patient intake policies. There will be a public hearing along with mandatory training on unconscious bias and racial discrimination in healthcare." Monica nodded slightly. She didn't need to say more. There was nothing left to demand. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken, and now it was time for the system to hold up a mirror and look at itself. 3 days later, a headline appeared in the city's leading newspaper under the society section. "Eastbrook Medical Center, accused of racial discrimination, doctor suspended, patient speaks out." In the article was a photo of Monica Brooks standing in front of the white marble building where it all began. But she wasn't alone this time. She stood among supporters, reporters, civil rights activists, and, as always, David Brooks quietly at her side, a pillar amid the storm. A week later, the center issued an official statement. Dr. Victoria Langford would be indefinitely suspended. An interagency investigation team had been formed to re-evaluate the entire patient intake system. They pledged to prioritize patient rights, especially those of minorities and vulnerable groups. And Monica, she received an apology not just from the center, but from many who had once ignored her. But she didn't stop there. She didn't just want justice for herself. She wanted justice for every woman of color who would walk through doors like those in the future without having to brace themselves just to be treated like a human being. 2 weeks later, the morning in Atlanta was no longer quiet. A small wooden podium had been set up in front of the white marble building of Eastbrook Women's Medical Center. Rows of neatly arranged chairs faced the woman preparing to step up. Monica Brooks stood behind the shade curtain holding the speech sheet, but her eyes weren't on the paper. They were on her belly, rounding now than it had been 2 weeks before, where her child continued to grow, as if that new life had chosen this moment to remind her, "Mum, you're not just speaking for me, you're speaking for the world." Beside her stood David, always quiet, always steady, and today, full of pride. He said nothing, just nodded. A single nod that sent a current of calm straight into her heart. The program coordinator gave the signal. Monica stepped up. The microphone hummed gently. No background music, no elaborate introductions, just the eyes of everyone present, from social justice leaders to young mothers, former patients, and quiet medical staff standing in the back. She began, "My name is Monica Brooks, and I stand here today not to recount an incident, but to speak about a system. A system that seems invisible, clutches tightly at the feet of people like me. Every time we step into a room, others think we don't belong in." That day I came to the clinic for an ultrasound. No gold watch, no designer dress, no one is accompanying me. And because of that, I was labeled with a look, priced by an assumption, and stripped of my rights simply because my presence made someone else uncomfortable. Monica paused. No one spoke. An older man in the front row removed his glasses, and his eyes were red. A young mother in the back, holding her baby, nodded quietly. I know I'm not the first, and chances are I won't be the last. But I will not be silent, and I hope starting today we begin calling that silence what it is: complicity. Discrimination doesn't always wear the face of harsh words. Sometimes it hides behind pretending not to see, behind policies designed to exclude in perfectly legal ways, behind questions asked not to understand, but to reject. But today, I am not here to blame. I am here to open a door. For dialogue, for transparency, and for hope. Monica glanced down at her belly, smiled, then raised her eyes to meet the crowd. I want my child to grow up in a world where mothers don't have to prove their worth just because they walk in alone, or wear a skin tone others aren't comfortable with. We will not be silent. We will not back down. We will not disappear, so that others can stay comfortable. Applause rose, not loud, not boastful, but the kind of applause that feels like stones falling off chests. David stepped forward and took her hand. In his eyes, there was something words could never fully describe: reverence. Behind them, the clouds parted. Sunlight poured over the podium like a gentle blessing on a future just beginning to reveal itself. Monica looked up, then bowed her head in quiet thanks. Not because everything had been resolved, but because finally, something had begun.